Brahman, Parashakti, Parasamvit, Buddha, Namah Shivaya, Shivaya, Namah. Om Shiva Aham, Aham, Aham. Om Tat Sat. Namaste. So this morning, let's get into the theory and practice of meditation. The classical goal of meditation, as set out by Patanjali and many others, is the achievement of samadhi. There are very many different schools of yoga, even of the classical meditative variety, that developed different types of samadhis, different levels of samadhi, different depths of samadhi, different contexts of samadhi. But basically, the intention of samadhi is, as the word, the etymology says, the sum means to bring together, to collect into a whole, and establish, the adhi is establish that wholeness and abide in it. So what do we mean? In the normal state of waking consciousness, the awareness pays attention to an object. So you have the subject, the knower, the attention or the knowing. Let's say the object is this candle flame and the known is the flame. So you have what is called the triputi, knower, knowing, known, or subject, object. Our normal attention is externalized and aimed at objects that are then labeled good or bad, wanted, unwanted, and what they are used for, what can be done with it, and whatever else in terms of information is wanted from the object is pulled in through the attention. In meditation, we are taking that attention and turning it back to the knower. So the knowing is now aimed at the knower, and the knower becomes the known. The known, the knowing, and the knower become one. You will often see this symbolized in Zen calligraphy by the circle that is drawn, or the symbol of the Ouroboros in Western alchemy, of the snake that eats its own tail. So it is that turning around of the attention and turning inward toward the source of one's own awareness, from the place from which the sense of I arises. And you want to go into that awareness that is the I amness prior to thought, without it being intermediated by a thinking process. So that the knowing is not a representation of the known, but is the being of the known. So I am not attending to the knower in order to give it a name or in order to see a form, but I am attending to the knower that is the known by being that. The attention returns to what originally sent it out, and the becoming returns to its being. And then you have collected together these two polarities of subject and object, and now you hold them together and establish that as a unity. And And that's, you could say, the first stage of samadhi. Then, as you go deeper into it, as you perceive for a longer period without labeling the nature of the awareness, you discover that it is not a flat plane, but an infinite internal space. And there are levels of I amness. And you want to go all the way to the very deepest core of awareness, to the supreme I. And this will be accompanied by a number of phenomena, including the increase of Shakti, of energy, of intensity, of luminosity, and of a heightened sensitivity of feeling. And that feeling becomes ever more positive, more joyous. It begins as peace, but it becomes joy and opens out into bliss. And this is to be established until the sanskaras of externalization, of subject-object perception, have been extinguished, and the samadhi can then become permanent, or sahaja samadhi. So you don't need to sit with the eyes closed in a trance in order to be in that deep state, but then there will be freedom of the body, mind to function, while the attention remains unified with the supreme I. So let's meditate. Sit comfortably and we'll do the first one with the eyes closed, but we will also practice with eyes open. And you can begin by just simply relaxing the body, bringing the body to a posture where you can forget it, and bring the attention inward. With a silent mind, and you can focus first on the breathing and on the point of separation between the in-breath and the out-breath, the kumbhaka, in which there is no respiration. And in that stillness, let the attention go deeper within to the pure awareness. And instead of being aware of body or breathing or thoughts, bring the attention all the way back into unity with the deepest level of the sense of I. In which there is no thought, total stillness. Keep the body still without any nervous movements. Keep the mind still without any mental agitation or chatter. And keep the attention still on the sense of the deepest level of awareness. Keep bringing the attention deeper and deeper within until there's no trace of the sense that the I is related to either body or to thoughts. Abide as wakeful presence in complete mental stillness, alert and yet without attention focused anywhere but upon the self. Feel the intensity of the energy. Keep the mind free of thought, free of image. Completely present. When you've established yourself in the silence, and the thought-free state has become effortless. Then let the eyes open. If you're near the candle flame, you can stare at it, or just let the eyes stare a few feet ahead of the body or anywhere without focusing, keeping the focus on the inner self, without letting the visual information cause any disturbance or loss of the intensity of focus. And you can keep the eyes only half open if you wish. Continue in the thought-free state. And you may feel a flow of a current of energy that is both being received and transmitted. Without thinking about it, but allowing that flow to increase. Notice the quality of the energy. And notice how the entire perceptual field is contained within the awareness. There is nothing outside of the awareness. Which is empty of form. Om Shanti. Okay, let yourself relax. We can end the formal exercise, but keep the focus, keep the samadhi of the awareness present, even when you come back into greater activity and interaction with the environment. How many of you were able to stay in a thought-free state for most of it? Yeah? Okay. How many felt the augmentation of the intensity of the energy? Yeah, okay, Good. As that energy builds, it will become the Yoga Agni, the fire of yoga, that will burn away the old sanskaras, or the patterns of the brain waves and the firing of the neurons, and it will shift into a different mode of consciousness that will orient the brain differently to the mind and to the wisdom body and the Anandamaya Kosha. All the 7 bodies will be in alignment. And that energy of Shakti becomes the prana, that is the energy that communicates with the cells of the body and brings vital energy for the health of the body and the instructions to the cells from the soul. So you want to keep the energy flowing, and the prana is the stepped down level of the energy that is Shakti, that in its fullness will take you to the highest levels of consciousness. As you become more curious, more interested, more intensely focused on the self, the nature of the formless, ungraspable self, the power that holds the mind in silence will increase. And the intelligence of the larger, deeper self will send intuitive knowings and downloads into the consciousness that will create a paradigm shift and a shift of intentionality. Toward the fulfillment of the will of the deepest level of one's being. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about any of this, or comments, or anything you'd like to share about your experience or imperience? How many feel more calm and balanced as a result? Yes? Okay, good. Mm-hmm.
Does the mind sometimes act as a defense mechanism and make you want to fall asleep?
Yes, the ego will either create chatter or sleepiness, or some desire to suddenly do something other than meditate in order to get you away from the samadhi state, because if you stay in it long enough, the ego dies. So it will do everything it can to get you out of it. And once you have gone deep enough, however, you'll be able to observe the ego's tricks without falling into them, and then they will be extinguished. Okay.
Thank you, Shunya. A question from Chris, who says, what is actually happening when one is pulled from the witness state into a thought pattern? And what happens when one realizes it and comes back? Is it akin to falling asleep? And then he says, all my love to Shunya and the Sangha, miss you all greatly.
It's hard to give an answer to that because there can be two kinds of thoughts. If it's an ego thought, then it is what I was just talking about. The ego wanting to externalize you back into split mind and to maintain its control over the representations, the paradigm, the reality, context of the consciousness to remain egocentric. And so that is a kind of falling asleep. But you can also get higher thoughts. You can get downloads from a higher level of consciousness that won't disturb the samadhi, but will create an aha that opens up yet a more subtle, a higher level of understanding that will actually deepen the silence. And then I would say that those thoughts actually bring a deeper awakening rather than the reverse. So the more your attention is on the deepest level of the self that is egoless, the more that there will be the activation of the intelligence of the self that gradually will be realized not in words but purely in vibrational frequency that contains information that does not need to be translated into language. But that is a more advanced stage that comes after the subsiding of the ego's attempt to regain control.
Thank you. The meditation worked. Thank you. The meditation worked here, but in the night or in the morning, let's say 3 a.m. that I wake up, I'm not so strong at those moments, and so my mind is it causes this sleepiness. So in those moments, is it better to do chant a mantra or try to focus the mind somehow? Because this, what we did here right now, is not possible in the night or, as I say, like 4 or 3 a.m.
Let me stop you there because you have created a belief that it's not possible. That belief is false. You're just as strong then as you are now. The self doesn't lose strength. In fact, after you sleep, you should be even more strong, more refreshed. But you have to train yourself that the first thought you have is Shiva, Shivoham. Remain in that state. Return to it. As soon as there is the waking from sleep, remember who you are. And then in the waking, remain in Jagrat Sushupti. You're in deep sleep, silent, complete calm, and yet at the same time the body becomes active. And there is an awakening of thought, but thought that still is centered in the self, not in the ego. And if you do that, you will see that you are even stronger at those moments. But it requires training and it requires the will to transcend the ego and remain in that state constantly. Okay? Mm-hmm.
I feel I'm going through this experience of all the beliefs and all the opinions about everything that I thought to be true or I created the concept about is just flashing away. And it's like there are many different stages. So this morning until now it was feeling like I was in this spiraling soup, and it was like it felt really beautiful. And now I'm feeling so much energy and I'm feeling really hot and my heart is beating really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So it's shifting. The experience is shifting, and something that I'm coming to is this belief about what samadhi is, what God is, what liberation is. All of that just need to dissolve, and I'm constantly putting it away. I'm constantly putting it away because I believe that it's something out there and I cannot reach, or whatever the ego wants to create around this. And as I'm dissolving these beliefs, I feel how it's like opening all this energy inside me, and it's, I feel to express that because whenever something feels nervous or even there's a fear, I feel that I have to speak it. So,
It's
so
very good.
This is
You are moving through the ego and dissolving it because it's made of beliefs. And the more beliefs you let go of, especially those beliefs about liberation and reality and samadhi, all of those beliefs, as they fall away, you enter the real. And the real is beyond all beliefs and all ego. So you enter into an infinite space, and the ego can't contain that space. So the ego simply dissolves into it, and you have to allow it to go. To the extent you're identified with it, the heart will beat, there'll be anxiety, fear, but the more you become the witness to it, the fear becomes bliss. And that letting go of the ego itself, the belief that you are an ego, that's the final belief. The belief in the I thought. As that drifts away or dissolves entirely, then you realize the infinite bliss. So you're close, so stay with it. Don't let the ego come back. And don't have any belief about this that we just talked about. Okay?
yes, well, I can feel how there's this higher, the stillness that is actually another belief about how the stillness is, and that it's not this controlling of the mind, but it's this higher stillness that is already still.
That's right.
I don't have to silence the
There's
mind.
no one to control
And
it.
I have to be in that rather than be in the mind trying to still the mind. So it's in that. So I feel that's there too, and that's why I feel I'm not scared, even though there's fear. So it's like the fear contained in that.
But even that superstructure must be dissolved.
Okay.
Because even that is a limitation.
So
Let go and discover what is real in the now, not based on anything you've learned in the past, even if you learned it 2 minutes ago. Let it go, so that you are in the absolute unknowableness of what is real.
So meaning this, the fear being contained in the fearless, or in the...
There's no one there even to be fearless.
Okay. And I have a question that it's, I don't know if it's going to be really helpful for what I'm experiencing right now, but I wanted to ask about, I've been practicing and studying a lot the womb mysticism and the feminine mysticism, and as well about the menstruation, and I'm on my menstruation right now, and sometimes when I'm on my menstruation, I have very mystical experiences, because even though nothing like this, what is happening now, but I feel it activates the right brain hemisphere, and it opens this womb portal so naturally. So I wanted to know if you can share about your knowing.
Sure,
and
but it's
understanding.
again a belief, so let go of the belief about it. And yes, enter the Great Mother, the womb of the universe, and that emptiness and the fullness that emerges within it will carry you out of the body and beyond gender and beyond time and beyond all of the effects that are created bodily by the hormones and all of that. So they are used as a booster rocket in a way and into the divine feminine. But once you're into the divine feminine, then you transcend even the duality of feminine and masculine, and you reach that ultimate point of unity that is completely beyond form. Okay, so it's a phase that you will rise beyond, but it is useful, but don't hold on to it or identify with it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bruce?
A question from Tolar. He says, I'm a musician, and for a really long time, I've been willing to become successful and to play for people and release records, but I feel that the end is so near, I don't know what to do, if I should leave everything. I feel like playing music is a way to serve others, delivering messages I channel through me, but then again, there is a part of the ego involved. I'm confused whether it's time to give up on these goals. How to balance being in the process of doing things in this world and yet completely detached from the ego?
It's a very important question and a very subtle question that you will have to answer, but you need to be able to be the instrument, literally, of the flow of information that may come in the form of music, and the will of the source of that music may want you to play it and release albums or whatever way that music is brought out. But there can't be any egoic desire either for fame or approval or applause or money or any other intention except to serve the internal genius that is the intelligence of God that is inspiring the making of that music. And if it comes from that supreme source, then there'll be no doubt that this is what you are called to do. But if there is ego involvement in the process, then I would say your highest priority must be silence rather than music. And until you receive in the silence the power of the will that will then move you, whether toward music or toward another destination in the physical realm where you can perhaps even more safely make the music, and perhaps it'll be a different kind of music even that will be more appropriate to the higher development of the souls who will hear that sound and be entranced and brought into the same vibrational frequency of the power that inspired you. So the more pure the intention is, the more it comes from the Supreme I, the more that there will be no doubt that this is the accurate thing to do, or you will be guided toward another use of your powers. Okay.
Okay, a question from Eli, who said, in this meditative practice, is the turning of attention inwards directed to a particular point in the body initially, like behind the eyes, the center of the chest, or is it more conceptual?
Well, it's not conceptual, but it is to attend to wherever you feel the sense of I is rising from. And it may be in the beginning, you may feel it in the third eye, or you may feel it sometimes in the right or even in the left chest area as the heart. But that is a projection of that which is formless into the body, so that in a way it's a compromised formation that gives the ego a sense of it being embodied and remaining grounded as an I in a world. But as you go to the source of the I amness, you transcend the illusion that there is anything outside of the I. And the sense of world disappears, and you enter into a plane or a dimension of light that is wordless and worldless, and that is full of infinite potentiality, where the self that you thought you were before you reached this point disappears. And you become that unknown and unknowable self that is no longer particular, but is now universal, cosmic, infinite, eternal, and without any name or form. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Shunya. Very relaxing meditation. I have a question about Shakti and love. So sometimes I feel that I'm with these two energies, I'm in a different space. So I feel that I have more phases where there's more Shakti flowing through the body, and there's more power to say no to the ego and to resist. And then there's other moments where there's more of a surrender, and then there's more love flowing through the body, and the body feels lighter. So with this Shakti, it feels like there's an energy field more strongly around the body and inside, and then when that subsides into more surrender, more of a feeling of love and ease arise. Mm-hmm. So my question is, what should I be going for more? Which one requires more focus? Should the two be brought together?
Okay, what you're describing is the difference between yin and yang. Both of these energies are Shakti. And love is power as well, and real power comes from the heart, comes from love, and from compassion, and from service that is based on the realization of the self that is infinite blissful love. But when power is needed in a particular situation, then the yang energy will come. When one is in a situation, let's say in a context that requires more compassion and listening and being a container for the other, then it's the yin energy that will be able to give a sense of being loved to the other. And there will be times when one will give power to break the other free of some kind of a fixation or a defense mechanism or something that they require for the next step in their journey. Or it may be internally that the power is used to break you free if there are still defense mechanisms that are holding on to the ego identity. But the yin and yang will flow in balance, in accord with what is needed in that moment, in the wholeness of your being. And sometimes you may feel both of them are there, and that the two are actually one. And one is the inner side of the other, and the other is a way of expressing the power that gives support and confidence and a sense of empowerment to the others who are not seen any longer as others, but are recognized as manifestations of the self. And therefore, there is automatically a sense of love for all those other beings that are within the perceptual field. And so you will feel it simultaneously as love and power.
Thank you. So I shouldn't try to pursue one over the other,
No.
but allow both of these energies to work in the way that they're supposed to.
There will be a natural response that will be in accord with the context that has arisen.
Thank you.
Okay, Parush.
Question from Devendra, who asks, when we meditate, who is deciding to meditate, the ego or the self? How is the self able to connect and control the mind? Without a brain and sense organs, how does the self know anything?
You see, that question is tricky because it may seem like the ego is saying, I want to sit down and meditate. but the ego will find a way to keep you from getting into a very deep level of meditation. So once there has been an effort to go within, and you reach that pure awareness that is deeper within than the ego will fall away. And you will then realize that the ego had not been the agency that had caused the desire to meditate, but the self had penetrated and pervaded the ego enough to create that wish that was syntonic with the ego. And then at the moment when it became dystonic, because you were going beyond the ego's boundaries, the ego would fall away and the self would take over directly. And then you would realize the real I and the false I would have disappeared. So there is an apparent shift, but it's only apparent from the ego's perspective, because ultimately there is only one I. And the other is simply a representation of the I. And once you've reached the silence, all representations are gone. Okay. And what was the second half of the question? There was something else that was asked.
Without a brain and sense organs.
Oh, well, you know, with near-death experiences, it's very clear that one leaves the brain behind. There's even evidence of, we've seen some videos recently of blind people who can't see, and then they leave the body and they can see. So not only doesn't the vision depend on the organs, but the organs can block the vision, the realization of the environmental information that is all actually projected from within. And so all of that information is available regardless of the condition of the body. And in fact, the more you're out of the body, the more knowledge there is of the supreme reality that includes the body and the phenomenal plane, but includes infinitely more than that. Okay. Is there someone else here with a question? Okay.
A question from Birgit, who asks, when a vision comes during meditation, where does it come from? And do I see it with the mind, the ego, or the soul?
Well, again, you can get different kinds of visions. In the beginning, when you're still in the ego level of consciousness, you may get reverie images, memories, dreamlike images. I wouldn't call those visions yet, but they are experiences of the dreaming body, let's say. And the more that one refuses to pay attention to those, the more one leaves the ego behind and reaches the soul level of consciousness. And in that level, one will begin to get visions of the archetypal level of reality and much deeper wisdom regarding the nature of the world process that one is involved in and the vertical process of one's ascension back to the source. And when the soul loses interest in the images and information that it is receiving, but wants to know the source of that information, then one will reach the supreme I, which is the source of all imagery and information of whatever expressive mode that it appears in. But it will no longer need to be decoded in an explicate ordered form, but it will be entirely grokked in the implicate order that is transcendent of time, and so will not need to unfold. So in the same way that, let's say you're listening to a symphony, you only hear one note or one chord at a time, but you try to keep the attention there so the whole sense of the meaning of the symphony it remains with you as it unfolds from the first movement to the second, etc. But you're only hearing a small part at one time, but your attention can contain the entirety of the meaningfulness of those sound vibrations. Or in a text of a book that you're reading, you can retain the whole context of what is being read and connect the earlier chapters to the later, etc. So we have that capacity, but we can also grok it all timelessly in a single moment that doesn't need to unfold in time. And as you get closer and closer to the Supreme I, all of time, all the information of the cosmos is contained in a point of light that is immediately present.
Thank you. I have a question, but first I just wanted to share that I really appreciated last night's class, and something that stood out was when you were saying at the beginning of the class that now we're living in the imaginary and the real is what's illusory, or I can't remember the word you used, but like things are flipped, and I was kind of practicing this morning, imagining it was flipped, and that only the real, only God was what was, real. And it was beautiful, and I could feel like the body doing things without me having to think about it so much. So it was a beautiful practice, which I guess I should be living by, so I will try. And then my question is this relationship between, I think I've probably asked this before, and it always fascinates me, between Maya, illusion, and then Leela, because you mentioned it last night, because in a way, like, divine play is an illusion, but we talk about Maya as in some kind, it's like suffering, this is my question, I'm trying to link maybe some ideas together, like you were talking this morning about the personal versus the universal, and is that the difference? Like, if you're in Maya, you're fixated on your personal story, whereas if you're living by Leela, you've entered like a more universal, I was trying to think of it in terms of theatre, is it like watching the whole play and not feeling identified? Or
Yeah, I think that's a good metaphor. If you are actually Hamlet and your father was just killed, and you saw him as a ghost, you'd be in some kind of agony and horror, and probably look for a therapist and probably have other kinds of reactions. But seeing Hamlet as a play, you can appreciate the beauty of this archetypal situation and the perfection of its unfoldment in a way, the proving of the potentiality of a soul to rise to its own heroic fulfillment of its responsibilities within that context of its life world, but without the agony, but the ecstasy of it, along with the compassion that appreciates the beauty of the unfoldment of this drama that has so much wisdom to offer the witness. But the actors in the play who take it for reality and not imaginary will be suffering and won't be able to appreciate the wholeness of the play. And Hamlet may not see the different scenes that have different characters in it, in which Hamlet is not, and Hamlet may not have the compassion for Ophelia that you will have as an audience member, etc., etc. So your view of the perfection of the drama will be very different from any particular character's way of relating to those other characters and their situation. And so that's, in a way, the difference between Maya and Leela. You see it from a God's eye view and the perfection and beauty of it all. And you know there's not really any such thing as death. There's not really any such thing as suffering. And we are all immortal, eternal beings who are performing this play. But the ego doesn't know that, and so it takes the situation in a much more desperate and anxious way. Okay.
And also, I feel like you can't be at the ego level and say it doesn't matter, the suffering doesn't matter, because then that could just be psychopathic. I imagine one has to be at the God's eye view to really see it as, to be in a compassionate state. Because I guess I have a fear that I see the world now in suffering, And the idea of saying, well, no one's suffering, it doesn't matter. I worry that that is like being dismissive of the suffering.
It may be, but I think if your dispassion is real and is not simply a lack of care for the other, that dismissal of the unreality, let's say, the imaginary nature of the suffering, may give the other the courage to also dismiss it and realize the beauty contained within the dark cloud that they're going through, and see that silver lining that is a cliche but is always true, and grow from it, and let go of the karma that caused it, and then be able to flower in a higher state of consciousness as a result. So you may have been doing something that your ego might think is dismissive, but your real self recognizes is very healing, by breaking someone free of the usual kind of response of hugging and coddling and poor you, victimizing, that approach, which doesn't encourage the growth and the taking of responsibility for all the events in one's life. Okay. And you know, if you read Sri Ramana's talks, he's often very dismissive. He'll have people coming crying, a woman saying, oh, my husband just died, or my child just died. And he'll say, so what? It's not real. Go back home and go back into your real self and forget it. There is no husband, no son. None of it belongs to you. You know, let go of this nonsense. But it worked, and they would leave in bliss, you know, so be dismissive if you're at that level. Mm-hmm. Oh, you have the mic? We have to get 2 or 3 mics so we don't have to do a marathon every time we get a new speaker.
Well, thank you. It's been just an amazing application, first of taking in the teachings and then applying them. And in this meditation, a bit of what you've been saying, I was watching it happen, in that the adi, you know, the gathering aspect of whatever fragments are still hanging out there and haven't been collected back to the sum for that samadhi state. It was very interesting because when you said your interest, when the interest focuses on the I, but I felt more like, well, maybe, you know, it's the same thing. It was a love for the I. So that, I suppose, the interest and the love are synonymous.
Yeah.
And in that love, there was a voice. It was, you know, it wasn't really a voice, but then I could hear it later as a voice that was saying, this love is good for you. Funny.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was this fragment, right? That was afraid of loving God, or you know, being in that love potion state in the dementia.
It's not number 9. It's a different one. Yeah.
Good. Although number 9 is the number of the goddess, right?
That's true, but it's number 10 when you're loving Shiva.
Okay. Well, all right. One more. So maybe that was the fragment. That
Otherwise, you become a goddess and you're afraid of being too attractive, and yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, so I think that fragment there is having that sort of problem. And I heard God, or, you know, a higher voice say, this love is good for you. So, and it was when there was this recognition somewhere back, further back, it was a very joyful awareness of all of this happening. That was dispassionate about the fear, you know, that was, first of all, not explicitly, but I could see that that was what it was. And then the higher, the discernment playing in, discerning, hey, you know, go right in. And yet, further back, that at this passionate witnessing, there wasn't buying into any of it, and yet very playful about it. So that was, I can see those levels of awareness, and perhaps this movement of the Adi back to the Sam. Is my question.
Yeah, no, this is accurate. And what I felt you were expressing is that your God self took over from the superego that had told you no love is safe, right? It'll all end in desire and in catastrophic karmic backlash, etc., right? So you had created an ironclad defense mechanism against love as a four-letter word, right? And now that superego command has been overruled by a higher level of your being that has the authority to say, no, your heart can open in this context, and then let the love pour out from God consciousness. So I think that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
My question is, since everything comes from the divine, including the imaginary ego, doesn't it serve a purpose?
Sure. Just like we were saying before, Hamlet serves a purpose, but he himself may not get that purpose, whereas Shakespeare does, and those who watch the play with the right attitude will. So yes, the purpose is there. In the same way that Trump has a purpose and Biden in the U.S. and all of those shenanigans, Bill Gates, all of them, they have a purpose. But what their purpose is from their own perspective may not be as beautiful and perfect as the purpose is from the higher context. So, it all depends on the level from which we are perceiving it and what grid of meaning that we are installing over it, whether the relationship will be one that enables the unity of God consciousness and perfection to pervade all that is happening, or whether there'll be some paranoid projection of another that is demonic or is in some way violating the wholeness and the benevolent omnipotence of the God consciousness. And we would wonder, why would God allow this or that, right? So the understanding of the imaginary has to happen from the real, not from within the imaginary. Okay.
But even in the perceiving distortion of doing something that's not coming from the divine, isn't it perfect as it is, because
Yes.
it's always coming
It's
from
always
the divine?
absolutely perfect. But from the ego level, you may not perceive that. If somebody is beating you up, you may not think it's perfect at the time. If you can, then you are a saint, and that's beautiful. But it may be that there are moments that you don't realize are perfect.
So, kind of like what I'm curious about is, there's a lot of kind of condemnation about the ego, and isn't, like, the way I am imagining it is, what if we love it for what it is, wanting to be seen, and
Of course.
that. And
Who loves it, though? You see, if it's God loving it, yes, of course. It's there serving a purpose. That's exactly the point. The ego will then be turned into a server, an
Right.
instrument of God.
Right.
Sure, but the ego, from its own imaginary perspective, considers itself an autonomous agent who, I'm going to do what I want to do, and the hell with what others think, and all of that. So the ego will not be serving the God-conscious whole. If the ego does turn and surrender, then it will be recognized as let's say, a part of the mechanism of the whole, in the same way that your tires are part of your car, but you don't want to ride directly on your tires. You want some shock absorbers and some seats and a steering wheel and other things. So, but the tires are where the rubber meets the road, and they're important if you're going to get somewhere. So yes, all of the capacities that you've gained and used from the ego perspective won't be lost, but now they will be directed by a higher level of consciousness. So we could say that the ego is the child level, and then the soul is the adult level, and then beyond that there's the divine level that you want to be controlling the way that you guide your vehicle through life. But you don't want to get rid of it, you want to transform it and divinize it.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Question from Victoria, who asks, is there a technique to block or release or transform the monkey mind, many thoughts coming at you at once, to return to the self?
Well, I think Ramana's method, which is simply to be curious about who is witnessing the monkey mind. Is there a level of consciousness that is available to tame the monkey and to train the monkey to become an agent of that higher consciousness, to divinize it? That's the whole Hanuman archetype, right? The monkey becomes God. And so you want to bring the capacity to think about the highest possible thoughts. This would be the mantra Shakti that we talked about the last night. And then that capacity to think a non-monkey thought and to hold it will bring one to the real that thought is pointing to, and then one will be free of the identification with the monkey, and there'll be no desire to chatter anymore. There'll be a desire to go deeper and deeper into the center, the nucleus of one's being, and then that capacity to think will become the power of attention to download and to translate the immensity of internal information of the infinite intelligence into a mode of expression and communication that enables a resonance with that highest vibrational frequency. So the more that you want to know what is the source of the energy that creates the chattering mind, the more that it will be sublimated and turned into the divine mind. Mm-hmm.
I'm deeply appreciative of this morning's teaching and today, the afternoon, and just my time here. It's been wildly transformative.
Wonderful. I appreciate that.
Throughout the last 2 years, I've been just having this exploration of speech and taking vows of silence and kind of going in and out of doing that somewhat regularly. And I found that while being here, the more that I'm in silence, I realize that I just don't, there aren't many reasons for me to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do speak, it just drains my energy.
Sure.
So there's this natural longing to be in silence.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what that brings up is such a profound loneliness.
Well, actually, the desire to speak is to try to overcome the loneliness, right? To make a connection, to get someone's approval, to get a proof that you're okay and that you belong there and that you feel safe, right?
Totally, yes.
Right. So the more that you let go of that, then the more that the fear of abandonment is going to come up, because now you're not getting any proof from the environment that they resonate with you, they get you, they're okay with you, right? And so the fears, the paranoia grows within the ego level of the mind.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yes.
you have to have inner silence as well as outer silence, so you don't entertain those thoughts, but you witness them with compassion and say, oh, that poor ego, she was abandoned, she needs some sense of support. I will give it to her. I, the God self, will give it to the ego. And if you disidentify from the ego and turn it into the mental object that it is, which is just a complex of fears, right, that it tries to overcome and defend against, you can give the Shakti that is both love and power to that complex of psychological energies and structures and soothe it until it can be deactivated completely, and then the higher self can use the power of language when necessary or appropriate for a much more poetic purpose of the Leela rather than the Maya that will enable the inner beauty of your being to be expressed without any need for feedback from the other, and the fulfillment of your mission here as a divine being will be automatically fulfilled through not inhibiting yourself from speaking or singing or dancing or in whatever way that expression wants to come out in the appropriate circumstances, but also of just being in the silence, in the pure presence that emanates that divine love without doing anything at all. Okay?
Thank you.
So thank you for expressing that so beautifully and so openly without fear.
There was a lot of fear.
Well, you overcame it, though. It's not your fear. You were able to see that the fear is an illusion and there's nothing to be afraid of. Now hold to that. Have samadhi of fearlessness.
Haji.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Priya.
Thank you. I also have a lot of appreciation for this whole weekend. It's been very helpful. And yesterday you mentioned grief when you were speaking about dementia.
Uh-huh.
And you said that some has to grieve the loss of the enjoyment of the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last weeks, I've kind of been feeling this two feelings. When I've had this higher discernment of seeing, okay, I don't have to be in this suffering that I haven't been recognizing before. I've seen a more subtle level of my own suffering and the enjoyment of that, and the recreation, the repeating of it all the time. So I've kind of been feeling both a lot of gratitude for being able to see that and knowing that it's not needed anymore. I can be, like, I think I've been seeing a higher level of well-being that I haven't been able to recognize before, that or even believing that it was real. But at the same time, it's been a lot of sadness coming up. So I'm wondering, which I think I see now, is grief of letting go of that.
Exactly.
But my question is, like, why is the grief needed? Why not, like, what part of the mind is not able to let go of that without the grief and just being appreciative? Okay, I can just switch to this higher level of being. Why is grief needed?
It's a good question. The grief is the last trace of the ego's loyalty to the superego, right? Because the cause of your grief is an inner relationship to the mother of your childhood and your father, but mostly the mother. And so as you let go of the grief, you're also letting go of her. And you're letting go of the whole family system and its your identity as part of it. and you're letting them down, right? And from that perspective that you project that they need you, and this is the only place where you felt needed, and right, even though they didn't actually need you or want you, but there was some sense that I belong, right? Even though it was causing suffering, and so the grief is the sadness of the letting go of a whole paradigm of reality that you now see as a fiction, but that this is what sustained you. This is what you were about for a long time. And there's a grief in letting it die. But once it dies, then the grief is over and you're no longer identified with it, and then there's just joy. But the grief is what allows you to let go of the last bit of the snake skin that you were holding on to until swaha, and then you'll start dancing and you'll be Zorba singing on the beach and all of that. But you have to go through that final letting go, right? So thank you. You're very close to freedom. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give you freedom from the class because time is over, but we'll continue later if there are still questions from the love stream and from the local stream. And I appreciate all of the questions and comments. They show that you're really taking this very deeply and seriously, and the transformative process is underway, and it's very beautiful. And so I appreciate everyone's earnestness and seriousness of purpose and the support that everyone is giving so that the whole energy field is one of love and one of appreciation of the divine nature of every other being here without any judgments, projections, or egoic constructs. And the more that we remain in that divine inner silence of pure love, the more that everyone's consciousness will rise to the supreme level, and we will appreciate the bliss of what we are as a unified whole. Thank you all. Namaste.